All right, so we had great questions from you, so we're going to ask you to maintain this momentum for the next session, which is going to allow us to learn about a unique perspective through a case-based approach, that of a patient considering a clinical trial abroad. To help us understand this better, please join me in welcoming Ivan Pourmir, medical oncologist and researcher at Hôpital Européen Georges-Pompidou, APHP in Paris, in France. As before, we'll take your questions at the end, and I'll try to take them in person, but if time prefers, we'll stick with Slido, but do send them on Slido at the least. Over to you.
So, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks again to Jens for this fantastic talk that resonates deeply with the ones that we're going to have. And for this particular topic, I would personally go into practical considerations because we already covered a lot of theoretical considerations that are really important. And then I think it's time to think of a concrete situation. So I'm Ivan Pourmir, I'm a thoracic oncologist. I'm also involved in clinical trial design and methodology. And we'll talk about participating into a clinical trial abroad. And from a patient perspective, obviously I'm not a patient, but the idea is to examine a concrete situation and to imagine in the patient point of view what are key things important to take decision in this particular situation. So I do not have any conflict of interest that are related to this talk. And so first we'll set things up with a fictitious case of a cancer patient that we can imagine so we can better project ourselves into this situation and reflect on. After that, we'll cover when does participating into a clinical trial abroad becomes a realistic and necessary option maybe. And then I think this is the core of the talk. We'll reflect on practical consideration that you may not have in mind, but when you're put into this situation that are very important to think of to be able to take the decision right. And finally, we'll address the question of equity, or rather inequities, how they can impact the life of the patient in the situation, but also potentially the scientific and regulatory validity of such a trial. So, let's imagine ourselves a 45-year-old woman. She's a mother of two, working full-time, unfortunately diagnosed with ALK-mutated metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. And she's experienced disease progression after 4 lines of therapy, including the latest generation ALK inhibitors available, and one of them was an investigational compound in a clinical trial that was run in her own cancer center. And so a clinical trial abroad might become a potential option in this situation. So before moving on, just take some time to identify key aspects of this situation. First, of course, we're speaking of a cancer patient, but there are also very important aspects in her life that will, have some relationship with the decision that we're making, that will interact. She's a mother of two, so she has 2 children, and given that she's 45, we expect her children not to be fully independent. So this takes a lot of time in your life, and working full-time. So these things are key elements to take into account when you're considering engaging in a clinical trial, of course, but moreover if it's abroad. And secondly, this discussion happens at the time of disease progression. Maybe it is announced in the same time that we are contemplating a clinical trial, or maybe it has been announced shortly before. And so there is an emotional burden that is important to take into account, and that will also influence what will be the discussion, and what will be the ability of this person and the person that are interacting with her to take such a decision. So when does a trial abroad become a real option? And so, as for everything, access to a trial begins with the information, the awareness that it exists. So who introduces this option? So it could be the treating physician or the treating healthcare team of this patient that is maybe aware of this trial existing and that has been researching for such trial, having the information of the cancer progression. It might also well be the patient herself, or because of her own research, or because of her social network, for instance, lung cancer associations such as LC. And so she would come aware of this trial outside the home country. And then there's an important thing. Say it's the balance between the urgency of the situation. Yes, you have a cancer progression right now, but also the required time, the necessary time that is to be taken to take the right decision. Even if there's no formal point of no return, as you may know, in participating in a clinical trial, participating in a clinical trial abroad would entail a lot of investment into your physical, psychical energy, of course, financial also. So this is not a small decision to take, and to take good decision, it requires time. So I would say at this point, it is critical if the doctor, the treating physician, for instance, that announced this option has not done it yet by itself. It's critical that the patient ask, what is the precise status of my disease right now? So how urgent is it that we take this decision right now? Metastatic non-small cell lung cancer is something that's very vague. So what is my tumor burden right now? Do I have lesions that are threatening, and for instance in my brain or whatever, that could give important symptoms and that require an immediate, efficient systemic treatment? Or are we in the case of oligoprogressions that we mentioned before, and I have one or two lesions there, but they are asymptomatic, they are not threatening, they are maybe measuring 1 centimeter, no more. So these are completely different situations, and there's not the same urgency in taking this decision, and so there's not the same amount of time that you have left. So very important practical point. And then the trust in your physician or in the potential other people that would take care of you if you're going into a clinical trial that is not in the center where you're taking care of. And finally, is the patient ready? Does or he or she feels ready? And do you feel also for the healthcare team, do you feel this readiness, emotional, physical, practical, and I would say practical, financial? This is an important aspect that we'll cover. So now, the core of this talk, practical realities of participation into a clinical trial abroad. So we'll just cover briefly the theoretical realities also. So as many of you know, we tend to propose participation into a trial if the routine options are not satisfying enough, or if there is something that is particularly promising that could bring some additional benefit that isn't investigated into a clinical trial. So this is the case here, but it means also that there is no such trial available right now in the center where the person is taken care of or in her home country. And so it's all about searching interesting options somewhere else. And so a first thing that can be done by, of course, the treating physician, the healthcare team, but the patient, him or herself, is to check those theoretical boxes that are in every cancer or clinical trial in general. Am I in the target population, for instance? So I have accumulated metastatic lung cancer, so is it the purpose of this study that I identified? Am I agreeing with the basic inclusion and exclusion criteria? And all these theoretical things can be checked in advance and can be seen on EU or US registry of trials. And then we can go on further and see if all these boxes are checked, then examine the practical considerations that are very important. So first, going abroad, of course, there will be some travel burden. So what is the distance from my home country where I live, where I'm treated usually, and the center where will happen this trial? How many time, a day or a week or a month I have to go there? And what is the impact on my physical condition of doing such a travel? And so for that, of course, it depends on the center where you contemplate participating into the trial. But also it depends on the precise protocol of the trial. And for that, you can already have in advance a first glance of how complicated or busy the schedule of the protocol is. For instance, if you're considering having an IV treatment that will require regular infusion at the treatment site, then it's completely different from having an oral treatment that you may get at the investigational center and then bring back home and take more easily, more conveniently. So this is different. And every protocol has a different schedule with some visit, and it's important to see within this schedule what is really compulsory or what can be also optional and could be for what the sponsor and the protocol can be more flexible and maybe allow you to skip some additional things that would make the whole thing more feasible. And then come the question of the costs. Of course, very important, the financial burden of doing that. So, of course, costs of transport, accommodation, loss of income also. Let's not forget that this woman is working full-time, so being available for the study, all the travel burden and so on, this will be time that she will not spend doing her job, and this will necessarily mean a loss of income. So here another important question is which of these costs are going to be assumed by the sponsor of the trial? And here again, I think it's worth to almost as much as possible to contact the sponsor or the investigational center to require clarification whenever it's needed about which costs are assumed precisely by the sponsor. Usually it's the case for transport to the clinical center, but is it the case if I'm abroad? Do you assume the cost of flights or only train and whatever? So it's really worth to require very clear answers about all these points to have a better idea of is it feasible for me on a financial point of view. Another important aspect is the language barrier. So as we said earlier, and in the fantastic talk that was prior to mine, communication is key. And of course, it's more agreeable to communicate well with a clinical staff, for instance, but also it can be a matter of life and death. For instance, if you don't know how to react properly, if you have some side effects, if you have some laboratory abnormalities, how to take properly your treatment, if there are pills that you take home, and so on. This can have a huge impact. And so you have to ask yourself and to ask especially the investigational center where you contemplate during the trial, are these people that speak the same language as me? Or do they speak English and I speak English? Are there efficient way to communicate so that the necessary information is shared? And the continuity of care, of course. So depending on the situation, will you live abroad for the duration of the trial? Will you do a lot of way and return journey between your home country and the investigational center? Then you might spend 50% of your time there and 50% of your time in your home country. If something happens to you, how are the people that take care of you at your home country aware of what you're taking in terms of treatment, what they are allowed to do without having protocol deviation and so on? So it is key that the information can be shared between these healthcare professionals. So I think at this point we can take one or two questions, and if there are more, we'll see at the end of the talk.
We already have lots of questions. So I'm going to suggest we start. How do I know for sure that my oncologist knows which trials I'm eligible for? Some clinical trials are useful even for non-progression. So that goes to your first slide about how to even know about clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. So depending on the countries, there are different systems to make patients and doctors aware of clinical trials. For instance, in my case in France, we have 2 or 3 main internet-based platforms that allow to put inclusion and exclusion criteria, what is the target population, and so on, and to identify clinical trials that are then sorted by relevance to the particular situation of the patient. But that might be different from a place to another. And so I think the patient has to be well informed on what is the platform we rely on, what has been the way to have access to this information, because that can have a huge impact. For instance, if this platform is industry sponsored, we talked already about this with other people here, and some pharmaceutical company is supporting and funding the platform that makes people aware of the trials, then there might be a risk that it favors the trial participation into its own trials. So you see, and maybe you could miss some important trial that is very relevant for your personal situation. So this is a very key information.
Absolutely. I think a nice question to follow up with is, what if my oncologist isn't interested in or doesn't have time to research and apply for a clinical trial for the patient? Can the patient make a decision on their own?
Of course. So
we just had a presentation on this.
Yeah. So we once again it relates to the prior conversation, but a person should be ultimately responsible for his or her own health, and so unfortunately he or she could not receive the support that she would like to have in the ideal, and in this case can also go and see other doctors, ask his or her social network and so on, and get in touch where places where it is possible.
Would you like more questions, or would you like to
I think
continue?
we'll go through the rest of the presentation, and
Sounds
I'd be
good.
happy to answer them later.
Sounds good.
If there are still some. So after, sorry, I'm not able to.
The magic touch
yeah.
with the clicker. 1 second. I say this. Back. Voila.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So then the last slides was about the question of equity and impact on trial validity. And so, as we said, there is an important financial consideration. There are many costs that we can imagine travel burden, accommodation. Something important that I forgot to mention is if something happens to you, in terms of side effects, for instance, or not necessarily side effects, but adverse event. And if you are abroad, who will cover for the costs that are involved? That can be huge. If you're hospitalized for many days and you're not in your home country, you might necessarily not benefit from the social insurance of your home country or your private insurance in those conditions. So all these things have to be clarified. And unfortunately, what appears is that some people will be more favored than others because they have more savings, because they have better private insurance and so on, that will be able to buffer such costs. So there are, of course, inequities in the ability to participate into a clinical trial abroad. I think the more the sponsor of the trial will be able to cover for these costs, and the more equity there will be, because then participating into the trial will not rely only on the patient's personal financial resources. And then there are also important considerations about the validity of the trial. These inequities, what they will end up in is often early dropout of the study. So what happens is that if you realize that you do not have, you were maybe too optimistic about your financial resources, or some unexpected things happened and with high cost, then if you're in the categories of the less financially favored persons, then you have a higher likelihood of dropping out of the study because you cannot cover anymore for some costs, for instance. Or also, if you have an important tumor burden, and as we told earlier, not every metastatic progressing cancer is the same. So you're more fragile, you're frailer, you're more likely to have symptoms, and then all this travel burden, emotional stress, and so on will have a higher impact on you. And so you're also more likely to drop out of the study because you cannot take it anymore, you cannot assume anymore the energy and financial expense of that. And what it will produce is that it will bias the result of the trial. Because when this situation happens a lot of time, then the trial is left with the more robust patients, the ones that have the most resources, and those are the ones that are also the more likely to survive, and so on. So this will artificially make appear higher, for instance, survival endpoint in the study. And an important thing also is quality of life measure. So of course, there's an important impact of all this travel burden, all this administrative additional constraints and so on your quality of life. But in the trial, you will be given forms that you have to fill, and then you will just feel how you're feeling right now, but you will not given any precision. You will not be giving any precision about your precise situations that are extraordinary, that you have to do all these flights, train travels, and so on. And so this will appear on the quality of life measures, and they will not reflect what quality of life is expected then in a real world setting if, for instance, the therapy you are evaluating in this trial is finally marketed. Hopefully, the people will have it in their home country. There will not this will not necessitate traveling so much, all these expenses, all this stress, and so on. And so the expected quality of life will be different from the one reported in the trial. So there is also a potential impact on the trial results validity. All right, and I think I covered all the important things, and I want to thank you, and I'll take with pleasure the remaining questions.
Thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about, but if there's one thing I retained from Journal Club is that I hope that they use intention to treat analysis for those patients who ended up dropping out of the study for whatever reason. So thank you for covering all of that. So let me just go through the excellent questions our audience has sent us. So, great question. Okay. So what happens to patients who benefit from a clinical trial abroad when the study ends, and who is responsible for ensuring they don't lose access to treatment?
Very, very good question, and there is no 100% valid response to this question, so it depends on the trial protocol. And sometimes it can change during the trial. There can be amendment regarding that. So as for the rest, what I would encourage is to require the clearest possible information before engaging into the trial.
Thank you very much.
From the sponsor.
I'm going through the questions and seeing if there's any themes. There are themes about, so Gillian Ryan from Ireland asked, can you get travel insurance to fly for a trial abroad? And will the burden of cost fall on the patient?
Yeah, so I think all these questions, there are, there is no specific legislation that will be 100% of the time valid for all trials and all participants. So it depends from the trial, it depends from the sponsor, from the firm that is running the trial, it depends from your personal insurance.
For sure.
But what I can say is that yes, there are sponsors that are assuming the cost of you traveling, even if it's across borders. There are sponsors that are assuming the cost of your accommodation, and also that are assuming the healthcare expense that you might have if you're experimenting a side effect. But here you have to be also careful. What is a side effect? What is an adverse reaction of the drug? Maybe if it's a completely new therapy, it's the purpose of the trial to know what are or not side effects of the trial. So how can we be sure that the problem that I have currently during this trial is due to the treatment or not? And so this requires clarification before engaging into the trial, because if you participate in it and then you suffer from something and finally the sponsor say, okay, this is not from, this does not belong to the side effects that we expect from this therapy, so I won't pay for the expense that you had feeling sick in the plane or whatever. So this request the most clear information before doing anything.
Absolutely. There's a really great question here about ethics. So the question is, are ethics applicable from one country to the other? I think they also mean, are they the same principles from one country to the other? How can I be sure that it is safe?
I'm not sure I understood the relationship between ethics and safety.
So I'm trying to envision a scenario where giving a treatment might cause more. We don't know if the harms. We don't know the potential harms of an experimental treatment. Maybe different countries have different thresholds of anticipated harm. Just trying to read into whoever asked this question's mind, but that's how I understood the question.
Yeah, so obviously you might be aware that it is also the purpose of the trial to ascertain what is the safety of the therapy that is evaluated. So we cannot know for sure, is it safe? And as for every potent therapy, there is no completely safe therapy. Things can happen, and unexpected things can happen. So of course you must be aware that there could be adverse effects. But the balance between the benefit and the risk must be, prior to the conduct of the study, judged positive, and there shouldn't be early signs of so much toxicity that we're quasi certain that the harm will be more than the benefit. That said, from a country to another, these are different regulatory bodies that will assess if, in their opinion, it's worth conducting this trial or not on a benefit risk balance point of view. And so if you're going abroad, then it's up to the regulatory bodies of the trial, of the country where you're traveling, to decide if they are okay for this trial to be conducted in this country. And so your home country won't have anything to say about that. So you must be aware of that.
I can literally scroll and keep scrolling. You guys have given me so many great questions, but unfortunately that is all the time that we have for this session. Please join me in warmly thanking Ivan for his contributions.
Thank you. And I'll take all the questions after if you want. See you.